Hello everyone, my name is Rob, welcome to Kinetic Rugby League. In this video I'll be giving you my NRL Round 22 tips and predictions video. If you'd like to check out how I got on last week, you can check the pinned comment down below and you can see how I did with the winners and the winning margins. So without further ado, let's get started with Round 22. So kicking things off with round 22, we have the Brisbane Broncos at home against the Sydney Roosters. Now, I say at home, but they are hosting from the Gabba in Brisbane, which is not their usual home stadium of Suncorp. But I will reference them as the home team. So they currently sit in second place. They've won 4 in the last 5, and their home record is 5 wins and 4 losses. They also won last time out against the Rabbitohs. Now, looking at the squad that they've announced for this weekend includes Reece Walsh, Mariner, Staggs, Farnworth, Cobbo, Mam and Reynolds. In the forwards they have Flegler, Walters, Haas, Capewell, Piacora and Carrigan. And on the bench, Smoothie, Jensen, Hetherington and Palacia. Now looking at their percentage stats, they have a 74% win rate, 77% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 86.9%. Moving on to the Sydney Roosters, they currently sit in 12th place on the ladder. Their current form is 2 wins in the last 5 and their away record is 3 wins and 6 losses. They also won last time out against the Titans. In terms of their squad, they've gone with Tedesco, Tupou, Smith, Manu, Suwali, Kiri and Smith in the backs. In terms of the forwards, they have Warrior Hargreaves, Brandon Smith, Collins, Butcher and Bradley. And on the bench, they have Turpin, Brown, May and Baker. Now looking at their percentage stats, they have a 44% win rate, 75% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.5%. So last week, the Roosters came out with a very surprising victory. One thing that was made very clear during the commentary was that the Roosters have only scored an average of 16 points per game. And they were able to do that within about, I think, 20 minutes, possibly sooner. They put up 30 points or 36 points in the first half, which was insane. It was 30 points. Now, where that came from, I don't know. I don't know if the Titans were just underprepared. I don't know whether the Roosters were, playing to their highest potential and the Titans just couldn't compete with them. Maybe this is the best performance they've been capable of all season. I just don't know with the Roosters. Now, against a team like the Broncos, who are significantly stronger defensively than the Titans, I cannot see a repeat of that. Now, I do feel that the Roosters will take a lot of confidence from last week, and there'll be some things that maybe they tried working on some new attacking structures, possibly, that they'll try and take into this one. The Broncos will be unfamiliar with it. There's not as much film to go back on and look at what kind of lines they're running. So it's possible the Broncos may struggle in some areas defensively because they won't be used to a new style of Roosters. I just think the execution was probably on point. And especially when you have players like Tedesco, the last couple of weeks, especially since Game 3 of Origin, has been on real top form. In attack and defence, has been very reliable on both sides of the ball. It certainly helps. When your best players, when your leaders are leading by example, it helps to sort of drive the team through difficult times. Now, the Broncos, they've had a few difficult weeks, especially without Haas, Walsh, and it is difficult missing out on some key players. Oates is another one of those, and Ricky. It is tough, but they do tend to deal with them quite well. But they will have a strong team. There's no Ricky and there's no Oates, and they can kind of make up for those with some decent replacements. So I'm not too concerned about the Broncos. I still think they'll be completely fine. Walsh has been playing out of his skin this season. Adam Reynolds will control the game as usual. Tom Flegler is back, so that's huge for them. Really important player in the forwards. So for me, I think it'll be fairly one-sided. I do think the Roosters will certainly put up points, but nothing to challenge the Broncos. And considering the Broncos put in a much stronger performance against the Rabbitohs than I expected, I knew that they'd do well, but I didn't think they'd do quite as well. I had it as a 1 to 12 gap. But I think I'll lean heavily towards the Broncos on this one. So I'm going to take the Broncos to win 13+. Next up, we have the West Tigers at home against the South Sydney Rabbitohs. And starting with the West Tigers, they currently sit in 17th place on the ladder. They've won 0 in the last 5, and their home record is 2 wins and 7 losses. They also lost last time out against the Dragons. This week, they'll be hosting from Scully Park in Tamworth. And looking at the squad that they've gone for this week, it includes Bula, Nofaluma, Toa, Tupou, Staines, Laurie, and Brooks. And for the forwards, they have Uto Okamanu, Coruscant, Clemmer, Papali'i, Bateman, and Paulet. And on the bench, they have Will Smith, Bloor, Toll, and James. If I mispronounce any of these names, please forgive me, but I'm getting there. In terms of the percentage stats for the Tigers, they have a 17% win rate, 75% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 88.9%. Moving on to the South Sydney Rabbitohs, they currently sit in 9th place on the ladder. In terms of their form, they've only won 1 in the last 5, but their away record is actually 7 wins and 3 losses. Now, looking at the team that they've gone for this week, it includes Latrell Mitchell, who's returning, Johnston, Tass, Graham, Milne, Walker, and Ilias in the backs, and in the forwards, they've gone with Arrow, Cook, Sele, Kalamatangi, Host, and Murray. And on the bench, they have Moale, Havili, Cartwright, and Tom Burgess. In terms of percentage stats for the Rabbitohs, they have a 53% win rate, 76% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 88.1%. So I do see this game as a possible... I do see a world in which there is an upset here, because if the Rabbitohs were missing more key players, so if Latrell Mitchell wasn't playing, for example, if Cody Walker, for whatever reason, wasn't playing, I could definitely see, with the players returning for the Tigers, such as Luke Brooks, such as Charlie Staines, and Api Coruscant being back the last couple of weeks, I could definitely see a world in which the Tigers put up a strong fight and maybe upset the Rabbitohs. Now, given that the Rabbitohs basically have a full team available, I don't think that a team with Latrell Mitchell in it is going to let that happen against last place in the league. I don't see it. Now, if Mitchell wasn't there, maybe they could exploit the inexperience of Taff, for example, but given that Mitchell is there, I don't see it happening, and I think defensively he is more sound, more confident, has more experience, but then in attack is just a completely different beast compared to Taff. So Mitchell is going to be a key difference maker here. Having Luke Brooks available is actually huge, because before his injury, he was really putting the Tigers on a much more steady path, and I think people certainly recognise that. Having Api Coruscant has been huge for them. They definitely look different with him and Brooks now in the team. So I think there is a possibility. Now, I'm going to go with a fairly big win here, but I do feel that it actually wouldn't surprise me if this is a close game to a point where the Tigers can upset. Now, they might come out and get destroyed, but I actually wouldn't be that surprised if the Tigers put up a good fight here. It wouldn't shock me, because the Rabbitohs have been a little bit off. 1 in the last 5. Their away record is really good, though. So I'd like to think the Rabbitohs would be fine, because on paper they should be, and I think most people will agree with that. But if you look at kind of like the nuances, I think there is a world in which the Tigers come out with an upset. So it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. But I'm going to stick with what's on paper. And what I see on paper is a vastly greater team leaning towards the Rabbitohs. So with that being said, I'm going to go with the Rabbitohs to win 13+. Next up, we have the Melbourne Storm at home against the Parramatta Eels, and starting with the Melbourne Storm, they currently sit in 4th place on the ladder. They've won 3 in the last 5, and their home record is 6 wins and 3 losses. They also lost last time out against the Knights. They will be hosting from the Marvel Stadium in Melbourne this week. In terms of the squad that they've gone for, they have Meaney, Warbrick, Seve, bear with me on this one, Tunamapia, Coates, Munster, and Hughes in the backs. The forwards, they've got Kamikamitha, Grant, Welch, Liero, Eisenhuth, and King. And on the bench, they have Garlick, McDonald, Katoa, and Wishart. I'll get there one day with all the names. In terms of percentage stats, they have a 61% win rate, 80% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 86.8%. Moving on to the Parramatta Eels, they currently sit in 8th place on the ladder. Their form is also 3 wins in the last 5, and their away record is 4 wins and 5 losses. They also lost last time out to the Cowboys. In terms of the squad that they've gone for this week, in the backs they have Gutherson, Blake, Penasini, Simonson, Russell, Assey, and Moses. In the forwards they have Ogden, Brands, Barlow, Davey, Cartwright, and Hopgood. And on the bench they have Moretti, Offahengawi, Lussick, and Matteson. Joey Lussick is a debutant from St Helens in Super League. In terms of percentage stats for the Eels, they have a 53% win rate, 74% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.1%. So I really was not expecting the Knights to come out and beat Storm last week. I thought, given that they'd basically have their full team available, they'd be completely fine. There'd be no issues. They'd kind of just walk it, and they'd be okay. Given how inconsistent the Knights are, I thought it'd be completely fine. Was not expecting it. Now, I do think that they'll bounce back this week. The Eels I do see as a stronger team overall than the Knights, but I think the Eels can still put up a good challenge. Their form has been equal to Melbourne Storm's in the last couple of weeks. There was a point where the Eels were absolutely flying. They're probably top 4 in the league based on just overall performance. Now, losing Dylan Brown hasn't been particularly helpful, and he's supposed to be back, I believe, next week, if I'm not mistaken. But I think Assi at number 6 has been doing a pretty decent job. He's not the same, but has been doing a good job. And Mitchell Moses, week in and week out, puts in top performances. Now, in the forwards, the Eels have a really strong pack. And given that Melbourne Storm aren't going to have a player such as Asfa Solomona, it's going to make them a little bit lighter in the forwards. But you look at the overall spine of Melbourne Storm, with Nick Meaney, who's been doing a good job at number 1. You have Cameron Munster, the most effective number 6 in the league. Jerome Hughes, I'd say, one of the most, what's a good word, respected number 7s. Is like, you just know you're going to get a good performance out of him, I guess is a good word. Respected, maybe. And then Harry Grant being who some people would consider the best number 9 in the NRL. Maybe top 3 as a minimum. But the spine that the Storm have got is insane. But it's just getting that performance out and not dropping games to like the Knights, for example, even though nuances can happen and, different things occur. But I do think the Eels can put up a good fight. I think they can make it a fairly close game, because sometimes people notice with the Eels that they can be inconsistent, but when it comes to like big games, and this is not the time to make a joke about the grand final last year, but when it comes to big games, they can put in real challenges. Like, they kind of just come out of nowhere and just shock you. Now, they have some howlers, some proper howlers, and lose games that they really shouldn't, because this is the Parramatta Eels we're talking about. But they have the quality in their side to challenge the best. On their day, they can challenge the best. And you have players like Gutherson at the back, very reliable, very skilled. So I do think it can be an exciting, close game. So the Melbourne Storm just need to be on it, and the Eels just try and chip away. They probably learned a lot from the Knights last week and how they were able to sort of get that victory, but I do think Melbourne Storm will be able to bounce back this week. Craig Bellamy is not the type to lose back-to-back, typically, as a coach. So with that being said, I'm going to take the Melbourne Storm to win 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have the Canberra Raiders at home against the Newcastle Knights, and starting with the Canberra Raiders, they currently sit in 5th place on the ladder. Their current form is 3 wins in the last 5, and their home record is 5 wins and 3 losses. They also lost last time out against the Warriors. They'll be hosting this week from GIO Stadium in Canberra. Now, looking at the squad that they've gone with, in the backs, they have Chris, Hopewate, Croker, Timoko, Rapana, Whiten and Fogarty, their usual, I suppose. In the forwards, they have Papali'i, Wolford, Tarpany, Young, Whitehead and Horsburgh, their usual. In terms of the bench, they have Starling, Gula, Sarlo and Mariota. Now, looking at the percentage stats for the Raiders, they have a 61% win rate, 78% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 88.2%. Next up, we have the Newcastle Knights, who currently sit in 10th place on the ladder. They've won 3 in the last 5, but their away record is only 2 wins and 6 losses. They also won last time out against the Melbourne Storm. Now, in terms of the squad that they've gone with, they have Ponga, Young, Gagai, Best, Marju, Gamble and Hastings in the backs. In the forwards, they have Saifiti, Crosland, Thompson, Frizzell, Fitzgibbon and Elliott. And on the bench, they have Mann, Jones, Hetherington and Croker. Now, in terms of percentage stats for the Knights, they have a 44% win rate, 75% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.9%. So I'm kind of leaning towards a little bit of an upset here. There's a few reasons why. So first of all, both teams are pretty much going into this with like their full team available. So you could say, well, based on overall performances this year, yes, they're both on the same form. The Raiders at home are significantly better than the Knights away. But overall, I think in attack and defence, if I'm not mistaken, the Knights are better than the Raiders in both areas. Now, the Raiders, if you look at their points difference, they are the best team in, or the worst team. The only top 8 team with a minus points difference, which is strange. Minus 56, I think, whereas the Knights are plus 50. So there's a huge difference there. Now, I do feel when the Knights have Ponga at 1, Gamble at 6, Hastings at 7, Crossland at 9, I think there's a real balance in there. It feels like they're able to maintain a lot of control over the games, because Gamble and Hastings at 6 and 7 are a good balance and they control things well. People don't typically expect too much from them. They're fine in terms of their performances. They're fine. They're nothing elite, nothing crazy, but you just get that little spark of Kale and Ponga in there, and it just sort of changes the dynamic. When Hastings and Gamble, they link up with Ponga, they become very dangerous. And then you look at the centres that they've got that can create opportunities. You've got Gagai, who's so experienced on one side. You've got Bradman Best, who's in incredible form at the moment, on the other. And then they're able to give the ball out to Marju, who's been fine this year, and Dominic Young, who's been excellent. Like, they've got a pretty well-balanced team. It's just overall the consistency has been a little bit lacking. But, you know, looking at the Raiders, they've been pretty solid this year, but as I said, with points difference being minus 56 whilst being in the top 8 is a bit of a strange one. Like, the impression I get from them is that they kind of beat the teams that they should be beating, but they can't beat the teams that we clearly see as better than them. But that being said, the Knights are a team that the Raiders should beat. But it's just a feeling. It's kind of just a gut feeling. Now, normally what I'd say is the Knights are a team that the Raiders should beat. And the Raiders typically beat the teams that they should beat. So go with the Raiders. But I just like that spine of the Knights. And when they're on it, they can put up a good fight against anybody. And I think as long as Tyson Gamble's not under too much pressure, or Jackson Hastings, they link up well with Ponga, they can find ways to kind of poke holes in that Raiders defence. I think they'll find ways to do it. I don't think it's going to be an astronomical gap. I think it is going to be one of the best games of the week. And I think there's a different feel around these two teams where they both have the same form, but it's been lacking for the Raiders, but been great for the Knights. And there's just kind of a different narrative for both of those teams. Now, away from home, the Knights aren't great, but I just have a gut feeling, which is probably not the best piece of advice. So avoid this game, basically, but my gut feeling says that the Knights are going to take this one by 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have the St. George Illawarra Dragons at home against the Manly Seagulls. And starting with the Dragons, they currently sit in 15th place. They've won 2 in the last 5, and their home record is 5 wins and 4 losses. They also won last time out against the Tigers. This week, they'll be hosting from the Wynn Stadium in Wollongong. Now, looking at the team for the Dragons, and there are a couple names on here I am going to mess up, and I apologise. If I don't hear a name regularly in commentary, I don't know how to get it. So I'm going to mess some of these up, so I do apologise. Now, in the back they'll have Sloan, Fegai, Sully, Lomax, Ravalawa, Amon, and Hunt. In the forwards, they'll have Molo, Liddle, Laurie, Burns, Russell, and DeBellin. On the bench, this is where I'm going to mess them up now. They have Mulhyson? Connor Mulhyson. Molo, Toby Couchman, not sure, and Bird. So I do apologise with some major mispronunciations there. But in terms of percentage stats for the Dragons, they have a 28% win rate, 76% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.1%. Moving on to the Manly Seagulls, they currently sit in 11th place on the ladder. They've also won 2 in the last 5, but their away record is 3 wins and 5 losses. They also won last time out against the Sharks. Now, in terms of the squad that the Manly Seagulls have gone for this week, in the backs, they have Garrick, Saab, Parker, Cooler, Tuipulotu, Schuster, and Cherry Evans. In the forwards, they have Sipley, Croker, Lodge, Olakuatu, Tuolagi, and Jake Trebojevic. And on the bench, they have Matterson, Woods, Kepi, and Bullymore. In terms of percentage stats for the Manly Seagulls, they have a 44% win rate, 77% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.3%. For me, this feels like a game that is right to lean fairly heavily towards the Manly Seagulls. It's understandable. I think a lot of people will go for the Seagulls on this one. What I'm not about to say is that, oh, there's a chance here that the Dragons win. Even though in any game there's a chance that anyone who isn't the favourite wins. Because, you know, with how this season has gone, anyone can win. But I do think the Dragons will put up a good fight. I don't think it's going to be enough to really challenge for a win. I think the Dragons will put up some fairly decent points this week, but it'll never be like close enough to really like challenge the Seagulls. I think they'll always just stay an extra step or 2 steps ahead of them, especially with Cherry Evans controlling things. Now you can look at Ben Hunt and say, well, what about him? He can only do so much in this Dragons team, but Cherry Evans has a much richer group of players around him. So I do think players like Ruben Garrick at the back, I've spoken about before, he doesn't have the same X factor as Tom Trbojevic, but he is a very reliable player. I think he can, you know, fit that back line anywhere and just put in 100% effort, do a good job. But he's just always missing that X factor in the number 1 role. On the wing, he's a great finisher, but a number 1 is just not quite the same. Although week in, week out, you'll learn to improve and maybe develop into a solid number 1. And that might have to be something that they consider in the future if Tom Trbojevic is not a good long-term option. So, in terms of the starting squads, on paper, the Seagulls have the much stronger team. I do think with the Dragons actually being fairly strong at home, there's a good chance that they compete with the Seagulls, but just with the squad that the Seagulls have on paper, I can't see them losing this game to the Dragons, especially after such a strong performance against the Sharks last week. I can't see them losing it here. So, my other game analysis have been a little bit longer, but I don't think I'm going to waste much more time on this one. So, again, I do think the Dragons will score some decent points, but it will never be enough to really challenge the Seagulls fully. So, I'm going to go with the Seagulls to win 1 to 12 points. Next up, we have the Penrith Panthers at home against the Cronulla Sharks, and starting with the Panthers, they currently sit in first place on the ladder. They've won 4 in the last 5, and their home record is 6 wins and 2 losses. They also won last time out against the Bulldogs. This week, they'll be hosting from the Bluebet Stadium in Penrith. Now, in terms of the squad that the Panthers have gone for this week, in the backs they have Edwards, Taruva, Peachy, Crichton, Toto, Luai and Cleary. In the forwards, they have Leota, Kenny, Fisher-Harris, Sorensen, Martin and Yeo. On the bench, they have Luke, Smith, Eisenhuth and Hosking. In terms of percentage stats for the Penrith Panthers, they have a 72% win rate, 81% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.7%. Moving on to the Cronulla Sharks, they currently sit in 6th place on the ladder. In terms of their form, they've won 3 in the last 5 and their away record is 5 wins and 3 losses. They also lost last time out against the Seagulls. In terms of the squad that they've gone for this week, that includes Kennedy, Katoa, Ramian, Tracy, Mulatalo, Trindle and Hines in the backs. In the forwards, they have Kafusi, Brayley, Rudolph, Nikora, Graham and McKines. And on the bench, they have Williams, Talakai, Hazelton and Hunt. In terms of percentage stats for the Sharks, they have a 56% win rate, 76% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 87.7%. So I feel like it's been a tough couple of weeks for the Sharks. And for the Panthers, it has been an incredible couple of weeks. Some really strong performances from the Panthers and some lacklustre performances from the Sharks. I think this one could get uglier. The feel that I get around this one is that we're going to look at the Panthers. So this game's going to be played. The Panthers will be way too strong for the Sharks. We're then going to be saying that the Panthers are favourites to win it all. And then maybe the only other teams that can challenge might be the Broncos, maybe the Cowboys. We'll basically say that the Panthers are the front runners and that the Sharks are now about to dip and just go into a major decline, a major free fall into panic. That's just kind of how I feel it's going to go after this game. Is that we're going to see the Panthers dominate and then people are going to start to worry about the Sharks. That's how I see it going. Now, given that the Panthers are basically playing with a full team, I don't really see them letting up too many points here, given that they're the best defensive team in the league as well. I don't think that would have been the case anyway. And the Sharks defensively have been a bit off the last few weeks. So I think a big win is very, very possible. A big statement win is possible, and that's kind of how I see it going. So, even with Braden Trindle coming in, I like Braden Trindle. I'd like to see him get an opportunity full-time elsewhere, because I still think Matt Moylan will come in and be like the number one option at 6, just in general anyway. But I just don't think it'll be enough to really change things. I think the Sharks are a little bit rattled at the moment, so I think the Panthers will just be too strong. So with that, I'm going to take the Panthers to win 13+. Now, next up, we have the Canterbury Bulldogs at home against the Dolphins. And starting with the Bulldogs, they currently sit in 16th place. They've won 1 in the last 5, and their home record is 3 wins and 7 losses. They also lost last time out against the Panthers. Now, this week, they'll be hosting from the Salter Oval in Bundaberg. Now, looking at the team that the Bulldogs have gone with this week, they have Averillo, Wilson, Kiraz, Burns, Adokar, Burton, and Sexton in the backs. In the forwards, they have King, Marnie, Pangai Jr., Kikau, Preston, and Faitala Mariner. And on the bench, they have Flanagan, Morin, Waddell, and Hughes. Now, looking at percentage stats for the Bulldogs, they have a 32% win rate, 76% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 86.3%. Moving on to the Dolphins, they currently sit in 13th place on the ladder. Their current form is 1 win in the last 5, and their away record is 4 wins and 5 losses. They were also on a bye last week. Now, in terms of the squad that the Dolphins have gone for, they've gone for Tabuai Fidau, Isako, Aitken, Tavare, Niu, Nikarima, and O'Sullivan in the backs. In the forwards, they've gone with Jesse Bromwich, Marshall King, Nichols, Kafusi, Lemuelu, and Kenneth Bromwich. And on the bench, they have Essa, Kerr, Milford, and Wallace. In terms of percentage stats for the Dolphins, they have a 44% win rate, 79% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 87.1%. So this game could absolutely be the game of the week. There's 2 ways to see this going. Either it's going to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, tries galore, and it's going to be a huge scoreline. Or the way I kind of see it going is that both of these teams just are so sick and tired of losing at this point that they're going to be really defensive. They're not going to be trying too much. They just want to get, consistent set completions, which is fine. But it could just make for a pretty dull game. However, I do think there will be those sparks, those moments, because you've got players like Tabuai Fidau on one side, you've got Averillo on the other. You've got Burton on one side, O'Sullivan on the other. So there's a bit of a back and forth here. It's a good match in some areas. But let's just consider the team that the Bulldogs are putting out this week, right? Jake Averillo at fullback is actually an exceptional player. He's really exciting. Now, we've seen a couple times this season when he's been at centre, just makes that run around the outside, has too much pace for another centre or winger, and he's just gone. He's just gone. He's playing at fullback again this week. He's really exciting to me. He's really exciting. Wilson, Kiraz, Burns, and Adokar as your wingers and centres. Adokar being back in is massive. Not only that, you have Matt Burton, one of the most dangerous kickers in the game, at 6. Then you have Toby Sexton in there this week, who I believe was possibly going to miss out. He was expected back this week, but it's good to see him available. So you have your stabiliser in Toby Sexton available. You have your kicking master in Matt Burton. You have a dangerous kind of penetrative player in number 1 in Jake Averillo. You've got your consistent creators in Kiraz and Adokar out wide. You've then got King and Pangai Jr. in the forwards, who are, pretty damn strong. You have Marnie through the middle, who's been really consistent. Then you have Jacob Preston, who's been one of the best players for the Bulldogs. And then Viliami Kikau comes back in, who was arguably one of the best forwards in the game last year. So on paper, this Bulldogs team is actually stacked. Like, it actually is stacked. They're in a real good position now. They keep this team consistently for the rest of the season. They're in a great position. Probably not quite to challenge for top 8, but you never know. They pick up a couple wins. They keep things consistent. They find ways to open teams up and become stronger defensively. They could scare some teams. I don't think they'll actually do it, but they could make some teams start to pay attention to them. Now, looking at the Dolphins, they've had some inconsistencies with the squad, but even with O'Sullivan being back the last couple of weeks, it's not quite been how it was. Tabai Fidau is the kind of player that can create things from nothing. You get him paired up with Nikorima and O'Sullivan, they can create opportunities constantly. Marshall King has been similar to Reid Marnie. He's just been really pushing them through the middle, giving them those extra meters, creating opportunities, controlling the game, setting the pace. So there's a good few matchups here. But I do think the Bulldogs could come out with the victory. And that's the way I'm going to lean. That is the way I'm going to lean. Even though the Bulldogs have not been great at home, they're hosting from the Salter Oval in Bundaberg, as I said. I think this is going to be a quality game and is going to narrowly be in favour of the Bulldogs. So I'm going to go with the Bulldogs to win 1-12 points. Finally for this week, we have the Gold Coast Titans at home against the North Queensland Cowboys. Starting with the Titans, they currently sit in 14th place. They've won 1 in the last 5, and their home record is 4 wins and 4 losses. They also lost last time out against the Roosters. They'll be hosting from the Seabus Super Stadium in the Gold Coast this week. And in terms of the squad that they've gone for, they have Brimson, Con Pereira, Kelly, Fafita, Sammy, Foran and Boyd in the backs. In the forwards, they have Fotuaika, Verrills, Liu, Fafita, Stimson and Clark. On the bench they have Campbell, Randall, Haas and Isaac Farsumalawi. In terms of percentage stats for the Titans, they have a 39% win rate, 78% completion rate and a tackle efficiency of 85.8%. Moving on to the North Queensland Cowboys, they currently sit in 7th place on the ladder. They've won 5 in the last 5. Their away record is 3 wins and 6 losses. They also won last time out against the Eels. In terms of the squad they've gone for this week, there is also another name in here I'm absolutely going to mess up. So again, bear with me, okay? Starting with the backs, they've gone with Drinkwater, Valame, Holmes, Hiku, Taulangi, Dearden and Townsend. In the forwards, they have McLean, Robson, Hess, Leilua. Here we go. Finafaiki. Definitely not right. And Cotter. On the bench, they have Granville, Tanoa Brown, Tamalolo, and McIntyre. In terms of percentage stats for the Cowboys, they have a 58% win rate, 80% completion rate, and a tackle efficiency of 86%. So, I, along with probably many others, did not expect the Titans to just fold as much as they did against the Roosters last week. I would say I don't think it's going to be as bad. The difference is, and the reason why a lot of people might think it will be, is because the Cowboys are a different beast to the Roosters. The Cowboys have been on it. In terms of the power rankings, the Cowboys are number 1. Now, for me, it is very easy to come out and say the Cowboys are going to smash the Titans. Because in my head, like, when I first saw this game, I was like, right, well, this is going to be like 54-10 to the Cowboys. But then I realised that it doesn't matter which way I go with the Titans. They're so inconsistent, they'd probably somehow win this week. Now, I'm not going to go as far as to say that the Titans are going to somehow beat the Cowboys. After the performance they put in last week, I do think they'll put in a challenge. I don't think it's going to be anything to really push for a win. I think they'll just be better than they were last week. It'll be a more normal game of rugby league where one team is just clearly better than the other, but it's not one of those astronomical victories that the Cowboys have put in, like, say, against the West Tigers a few weeks back, or the Titans getting absolutely demolished like they did in the first half against the Roosters last week. I do think the Cowboys, as I kind of mentioned with the Sea Eagles against the Dragons, they'll be comfortable. Like, the Titans will put up points, but it'll never be enough to really challenge at any point in the game. They'll just always have that gap. It's just too far of a reach for them to get to. So, I think the Cowboys will be extremely comfortable here. What I don't like about this team selection, and this is something that I saw this morning when I woke up, was in the first 60 minutes of the game last week for the Titans and Roosters, the first 60 minutes without Campbell, it was 36-0. In the last 20 minutes with Campbell, it was 18-0 to the Titans. And yet Campbell is not starting. But it poses a tough question of who do you take over Brimson and Campbell. Now, one very sort of basic answer, well, you take Campbell because they were significantly stronger when he came on. Right, but then who'd you drop? Do you really drop AJ Brimson? I don't know if you do. He's been incredible this year, but it's kind of like, well, if you have to for a better option, then it needs to be done. Do you drop Foran? I don't think so. Do you drop Boyd? Maybe. But could it hurt his confidence? Because he's been fine this season. So what do you do? What decision do you make? I think you can't drop Brimson. You can't drop Foran. You could drop Boyd, but in terms of long-term confidence, you don't want to. So what I'd say is just bring on Jayden Campbell sooner. And see if you can make sure that Foran is controlling the game early enough. You get that stability, and then maybe early in the second half you take off Foran, give him a rest. Let Campbell come on for 20 minutes, and then in those final 20 minutes, if you need a bit more stability, maybe if you need to choose between Brimson, Foran, Boyd and Campbell, decide which spine is best to go with based on how the game's been going. Give Campbell an opportunity to come into this game. He is going to be huge for them, but it's just difficult because the spine's already pretty strong, so it's how does he get in? It's a real tough one. It's a real tough one. But the spine of Drinkwater, Dearden, Townsend and Robson for the Cowboys is just immense. Absolutely immaculate. Drinkwater and Dearden especially are such special players. I love watching them play. And, you know, both extremely young, bright futures ahead, already highly rated in the league, but they could be exceptional well into the future as well. So we'll see how the rest of their careers go. I feel that they'll be the edge for the Cowboys. And the overall efficiency that they've shown the last couple of weeks has been just top-notch. And the Titans are too inconsistent. But with all that being said, I think the Cowboys will be clear favourites on this one and will control the game. The Titans won't allow what happened to them last week to duplicate this week. They'll put in a good fight, but it'll never quite be enough. So I'm going to go with the Cowboys to win 1-12 points. So to recap my predictions for this week, I'm going to take the Broncos and Rabbitohs to win 13+. I'm going to take the Storm, Knights and Sea Eagles to win 1-12. I'm going to take the Panthers to win 13+. And then I'll take the Bulldogs and the Cowboys to win 1-12. In terms of winners' confidence, I'm at about 75%. I think there's a few games that could be tricky. Melbourne Storm might have another off week. The Knights are inconsistent, so could definitely drop a game there. The Sea Eagles could have a dodgy performance against the Dragons of all teams. Panthers should be fine. The Bulldogs, I think, could be a little bit 50-50 with the Dolphins. And the Cowboys, I think, should be fine against the Titans. I don't see that much of a complete switch for both teams. Cowboys, I think, should be fine. In terms of the margin confidence, I'm at about 65%. A lot of these are going to be tricky. Really tricky. You know, I have the Cowboys 1-12. They could obliterate the Titans completely, so that could throw it out the water. The Bulldogs could get absolutely battered by the Dolphins. Like, that's something I could just see happening. The Knights could get blown out by the Raiders. Like, all of this could just get completely wiped away. It is difficult to predict the margins, but yeah, winners confidence 75%, margin confidence 65%. So that is going to be it for this video. If you have any predictions for round 22, let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know how you got on last week. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.